The crystal chandelier cast dancing shadows across the polished marble floor of the Meridian Country Club ballroom. I stood near the bar, nursing my second whiskey, watching my wife Talia work the room like she owned it. In her emerald dress and diamond earrings, she commanded attention from every board member, every executive, every person who mattered in our small Maine corporate town. Dean Calix, right? The voice belonged to Rhett Vossin, CEO of Consolidated Industries, the company where both Talia and I worked. His perfectly styled silver hair and $1,000 suit screamed old money, though I knew better. I almost didn't recognize you without your usual, casual attire. The conversation around us quieted. Board members turned to listen. Talia glanced over, her smile faltering for just a moment. "Should I give you some money for a proper suit?" Rhett continued, his voice carrying across the marble floor. "That one looks like it came from a discount rack." Laughter rippled through the crowd, not polite chuckles, but genuine amusement at my expense. Talia's face flushed, but she didn't defend me. Instead, she looked away, embarrassed. I took a slow sip of my whiskey, letting the amber liquid burn down my throat while I studied Rhett's smug expression. The man who made 3 times my salary despite running the company into the ground for the past 2 years. The man who took credit for every successful project while blaming others for his failures. "That's generous of you, Rhett," I said, my voice steady. "But I prefer to buy my own clothes, with money I actually earned." His smile tightened. "Of course. Your technical work is very valuable, I'm sure." More laughter. Someone whispered something about knowing my place. Talia had moved closer to Rhett, standing just a little too close for professional courtesy. I finished my drink and set the glass on the bar. "Excuse me, I need to make a call." The laughter followed me as I walked toward the exit, my footsteps echoing in the vast space. But inside my head, a different kind of sound was building. Not anger exactly, something colder, more calculating. In the quiet hallway outside the ballroom, I pulled out my phone and dialed Soren Valden, my closest friend and the company's CFO. "Dean, how's the party?" "Enlightening," I said. "Remember those dormant shares we discussed? The ones from the original incorporation? The ones worth about 40% of the company if properly consolidated? Yeah, I remember. I want them transferred into my name. Tonight." A pause. "Dean, what happened?" "Let's just say I've had enough of being treated like hired help. Can you do it?" "The paperwork's already prepared. I've been waiting for you to give the word for months. But are you sure? Once we do this, there's no going back." "I'm sure. Give me 2 hours." I ended the call and slipped the phone back into my pocket. Through the ballroom's glass doors, I could see Talia laughing at something Rhett was saying. They stood close enough that their shoulders touched, close enough that anyone watching would notice, and in a town like ours, everyone was always watching. I walked back toward the ballroom, but stopped when I heard voices coming from the side corridor. Talia's voice, low and urgent. "We have to be careful, Rhett. People are starting to talk." "Let them talk," came his reply. "After the new year, things will be different. I'm restructuring the tech division. Your husband won't be a problem much longer." "What do you mean?" "I mean Dean's position is redundant. We can outsource his work for half the cost. He'll be gone by February." My hands clenched into fists, but I forced myself to stay calm, to listen. "He doesn't suspect anything about us, does he?" Talia asked. "That man? He's too buried in his computers to notice what's happening in the real world. Besides, what could he do even if he found out? He's nobody." I stepped back into the shadows as they emerged from the corridor. Talia smoothed her dress while Rhett adjusted his tie. They returned to the party separately, maintaining their professional facade. But I had heard enough. I pulled out my phone and sent a text to Soren. "Initiate the transfer. Tonight. And Soren, make sure everything is ironclad. I want no loopholes, no escape clauses. When this hits, I want it to be permanent. The response came back immediately. Consider it done. I walked back into the ballroom, nodding politely at the people who had laughed at me 30 minutes earlier. Talia caught my eye and smiled, the same smile she'd given me every morning for the past 3 years. The same smile she'd been giving Rhett in that corridor. Tomorrow would be very different. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. I woke up alone. The other side of our king-sized bed was cold, the sheets barely wrinkled. Talia's phone buzzed on the nightstand. She'd forgotten to take it with her, in whatever rush had gotten her out of the house before dawn. 3 new messages, all from Rhett. Can't stop thinking about last night. When can we meet again? Your husband looked pathetic at the party. February can't come soon enough. I set the phone back down exactly where I'd found it and headed for the kitchen. Our modern open-plan house felt different in the morning light. Colder. The granite countertops and stainless steel appliances that Talia had insisted on suddenly seemed more like a showroom than a home. My own phone rang as I started the coffee maker. It's done. Soren's voice was tired but satisfied. As of midnight, you own 43% of Consolidated Industries. Combined with the scattered shares from pension funds and small investors, you have effective control. And the board doesn't know yet? They'll find out when they get to the office. Legal sent the notifications an hour ago. I poured myself a cup of coffee and stared out the kitchen window at the snow-covered lawn. What about Rhett? He's about to have a very bad morning. His employment contract has some interesting clauses about performance metrics and fiduciary responsibility, clauses that haven't been enforced in years. Until now. After ending the call, I drove to Maddie's bar downtown. My sister owned the place, and it served as the unofficial information hub for our town. If you wanted to know who was sleeping with whom, who was about to get fired, or which businesses were struggling, Maddie's was where you went. I found her restocking the bar for the lunch crowd. You look like hell, she said without looking up. Let me guess. The Christmas party was a disaster. Something like that. I sat on one of the worn leather stools. What have you been hearing about Talia and Rhett? Maddie stopped what she was doing and gave me a long look. You really want to know? I really want to know. She poured herself a cup of coffee and leaned against the bar. They've been meeting here twice a week for the past 2 months. Always sit in the corner booth, always order the same thing. Always leave separately, but get into the same car 3 blocks down. Who else knows? Dean, this is a town of 12,000 people. Everyone knows. They've just been waiting to see if you'd figure it out. The coffee tasted bitter in my mouth. What else? Word is that Rhett's planning some kind of reorganization after the holidays. Talia's been bragging that she's getting a promotion. Says she'll be running the whole communications division. And my job? Maddie's expression softened. I'm sorry, Dean, but yeah, that's part of the talk too. My phone buzzed. A text from Soren. Talia just tried to access the personnel files. Her credentials were denied. She's asking questions. I smiled for the first time in 12 hours. Dean? Maddie looked concerned. You're scaring me a little. Don't worry, I said, standing up. Everything's about to get very interesting. I drove to the Consolidated Industries headquarters, a glass and steel monument to corporate ambition that dominated our town's modest skyline. The parking lot was fuller than usual for a day after Christmas. Word was getting out. I found Soren in his office on the executive floor, surrounded by legal documents and financial reports. How's the reaction? I asked. Panic. Rhett's been on the phone with lawyers for the past hour. The board is demanding an emergency meeting. And Talia? Security had to escort her back to her office after she tried to force her way into the executive conference room. She's been calling you. I pulled out my phone and saw 7 missed calls from my wife. There's something else, Soren said. I've been going through the expense reports from Talia's department. She's been charging personal items to the company account. Dinners, hotel rooms, even a weekend trip to Boston that was supposedly for a conference that never happened. How much? Enough to justify termination for cause. No severance, no benefits. I sat down in the leather chair across from his desk. And Rhett? His performance metrics are even worse. Stock price down 18%, 3 major clients lost, and the Boston expansion that he championed? Complete failure. Cost the company $2 million in the first quarter alone. Through Soren's window, I could see the parking lot filling up with cars, board members arriving for the emergency meeting that would change everything. Are you ready for this? Soren asked. I thought about Rhett's laughter echoing through the ballroom, about Talia's embarrassed expression when he mocked my suit, about their whispered conversation in the corridor. I've been ready for this my whole life, I said. I just didn't know it until last night. The executive conference room felt smaller with all 12 board members present. They sat around the mahogany table like judges at a tribunal, their faces ranging from confused to annoyed to outright hostile. Rhett occupied his usual seat at the head of the table, but his typical confidence had cracked. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the room's cool temperature. This is highly irregular, said Margaret Thornton, the board's senior member and old money matriarch of our town. Dean, you're not even a board member. What gives you the right to call this meeting? I stood at the presentation screen, a stack of documents in my hands, and a laptop connected to the projector. As of midnight last night, I became the majority shareholder of Consolidated Industries. That gives me the right to call any meeting I want. Murmurs rippled around the table. Several board members pulled out their phones, presumably to verify my claim with their lawyers. That's impossible, Rhett said, his voice strained. Those shares have been dormant for decades. The original incorporation documents are buried in legal archives. Actually, they're right here. I held up a folder thick with legal papers. Soren and I have been researching this for months. It turns out that when Consolidated Industries was founded in 1987, the original investors retained certain rights that were never properly transferred or dissolved. Those rights include 43% ownership and the authority to restructure management. Margaret Thornton's expression shifted from annoyance to interest. Show us the documentation. I activated the projector and began displaying the legal papers on the wall screen. These are certified copies from the state corporate registry. These are the original incorporation documents. And these are the transfer papers, properly notarized and filed as of last night. The room fell silent, except for the sound of papers rustling as board members examined their copies of the documents. This is a hostile takeover, Rhett said, standing up. I won't let you destroy this company with some legal technicality. Sit down, Rhett. My voice carried a tone of authority I'd never used before. We need to discuss your performance as CEO. I clicked to the next slide, a graph showing the company's declining stock price over the past 2 years. When you took over as CEO, our stock was trading at $42 per share. As of yesterday's close, we're at $34. That's an 18% decline while the overall market gained 12%. Market conditions have been challenging, Rhett protested. Have they? I clicked to the next slide. Because our 3 main competitors have all seen growth during the same period. Hartwell Industries is up 22%. Northern Consolidated gained 15%. Even small regional players like Coastal Corp have outperformed us. Board members were taking notes now, their attention focused on the presentation rather than on Rhett's protests. Let's talk about client retention, I continued. We've lost 3 major accounts in the past year. The Portland municipal contract, worth $1.2 million annually. The University of Maine system, worth $800,000. And just last month, Bangor General Hospital, worth $600,000 per year. Those losses weren't my fault, Rhett said. The clients wanted unrealistic pricing. Actually, they wanted competent service. I clicked to the next slide, showing email correspondence. These are client complaints that were never addressed, system failures that took weeks to resolve, promised upgrades that were never delivered. Margaret Thornton leaned forward. Dean, what exactly are you proposing? I'm proposing new leadership, effective immediately. The conference room door opened, and Talia walked in. Her usually perfect appearance was disheveled, her makeup smudged, her professional demeanor cracked. Dean, what is this? Security wouldn't let me into my office. My computer access has been revoked. Talia, you shouldn't be here, Rhett said quickly. Why not? I asked. She's the head of our communications department. This concerns her too. I clicked to the next slide, a detailed expense report. Let's discuss departmental spending. Talia's communications budget for this year was $180,000, but her actual expenses totaled $247,000. The overage includes several interesting items. Talia's face went pale. A weekend conference in Boston that cost $3,200, except the conference doesn't exist. I called the hotel. They have no record of any corporate event that weekend. That was a mistake in the booking system, Talia said quickly. Was it? Because there are 6 more conferences just like it, all at expensive hotels, all for events that never happened. I clicked to the next slide, showing restaurant receipts. Dinner expenses charged to the corporate account, always for 2 people, always at the most expensive restaurants in town. Interesting pattern. Rhett was gripping the edge of the table, his knuckles white. These are serious allegations, Margaret Thornton said. Do you have proof of misconduct? I have documentation of misuse of corporate funds. I have evidence of falsified expense reports. And I have testimony from multiple witnesses about unprofessional behavior. I looked directly at Talia. Would you like to explain to the board why you and Rhett have been meeting twice a week at Maddie's bar? Or should I have Maddie come in and explain it herself? The silence in the room was absolute. Talia looked like she might faint. Rhett had gone from pale to flushed, his professional mask completely gone. This is a witch hunt, he said finally. No, I replied. This is accountability. Margaret Thornton stood up. I think we need to recess and discuss this privately. Actually, I said, there's one more thing. I clicked to the final slide, a resignation letter template. Rhett, you have 2 choices. You can resign immediately with a basic severance package, or you can fight this and face a public investigation into every decision you've made as CEO. The board will vote on your termination, and given what we've seen today, I don't think you'll like the outcome. Rhett stared at the screen for a long moment. Then he looked around the table at the board members, seeing no support in their faces. I'll need time to consider my options, he said. You have until 5 o'clock today, I replied. After that, the offer expires. As the board members filed out of the conference room, Talia approached me. Dean, we need to talk. No, I said, packing up my presentation materials. We really don't. This is about last night, isn't it? About what Rhett said at the party. I looked at her for a long moment. This woman I'd been married to for 3 years. This woman who had stood by while I was humiliated. This woman who had been planning my professional destruction while sharing my bed. Talia, this is about a lot more than last night. I walked out of the conference room, leaving her standing alone under the harsh fluorescent lights. By 5 o'clock, Rhett hadn't resigned. Instead, he'd spent the day making phone calls to lawyers, board members, and anyone else who might help him keep his position. Word traveled fast in our small town, and by evening, everyone knew that Consolidated Industries was in chaos. I was working late in my office, reviewing personnel files and financial reports, when Soren knocked on my door. Rhett's gone, he said. Left the building an hour ago. But Dean, I think you should know he's been making threats. What kind of threats? He's been telling people that you won't get away with this, that he has connections, resources. Margaret Thornton called me 20 minutes ago. She's worried about retaliation. I leaned back in my chair. What kind of retaliation? The kind that happens in dark parking lots. I considered this. Rhett had always been arrogant, but I'd never thought of him as physically dangerous. Then again, desperate people did desperate things. Where do you think he'd go? If I had to guess, the old warehouse district down by the river. His family owns property there. It's isolated, private. I stood up and grabbed my coat. Then that's where we're going. Dean, this is insane. If you're right about him being dangerous, we should call the police. And tell them what? That we're worried about the CEO we just forced out? They'll think we're paranoid. Soren shook his head but followed me to the elevator. At least let me come with you, and let's bring backup. 20 minutes later, we were driving through the warehouse district in my truck, with Maddie and 2 of her regular customers following in another vehicle. The area was mostly abandoned after dark, with only a few security lights casting long shadows between the buildings. We found Rhett's Mercedes parked behind a large brick warehouse that had been empty for years. The building belonged to his family's holding company, one of several properties they'd acquired during better times. His car's here, but I don't see him, Soren whispered as we approached the building. He's inside, I said, noticing a faint light coming from one of the windows. Question is, what's he doing? We circled the building and found a side door that was slightly open. I could hear voices coming from inside, Rhett's voice and at least one other person. This wasn't supposed to happen, Rhett was saying. That little nobody was supposed to stay in his place. So, what do you want us to do about it? The other voice was rough, unfamiliar. I want him to understand that actions have consequences. I want him to realize that he's made a very dangerous enemy. I looked at Soren and saw my own concern reflected in his expression. This wasn't just about corporate politics anymore. I pulled out my phone and texted Maddie. Call police. Tell them possible assault in progress at Riverside Warehouse 7. Then I pushed open the door and stepped inside. The warehouse was mostly empty except for some old equipment and stacks of boxes. Rhett stood in the center of the space with 2 men I didn't recognize, both wearing work clothes and looking uncomfortable. Hello, Rhett, I said, my voice echoing in the large space. He spun around, his face showing surprise and then anger. Dean, how did you find me? Lucky guess. I stepped further into the warehouse, with Soren close behind me. Interesting meeting you're having here. This is private property. You're trespassing. Actually, I checked the property records. This building is owned by Riverside Holdings, which is a subsidiary of Consolidated Industries. Since I'm now the majority shareholder, I think that makes this my property. One of the men with Rhett stepped forward. Look, mister, we don't want any trouble. We were just hired to have a conversation. What kind of conversation? Soren asked. The kind that helps people understand their situation, Rhett said. Dean, you've made a serious mistake. This isn't just about the company. This is about respect. This is about knowing your place in the natural order. I laughed, and the sound echoed off the warehouse walls. The natural order? Rhett, you're a failed CEO who's been embezzling company funds and having an affair with my wife. What exactly is natural about that? His face flushed red. You think you've won? You think taking over the company changes anything? I still have friends in this town. I still have influence. Had, I corrected. Past tense. As of today, your influence is worth exactly nothing. That's when he made his mistake. Instead of walking away, instead of accepting defeat, he nodded to the 2 men with him. Teach him some respect, he said. The first man approached me reluctantly, but before he could get close, Maddie and her friends entered through the main warehouse door. Evening, boys, Maddie called out cheerfully. Hope we're not interrupting anything important. The 2 men stopped and looked around nervously. What had been a 2-against-2 situation had suddenly become 2-against-6. This is a private matter, Rhett said, but his voice had lost its authority. Funny thing about private matters, said Jake, one of Maddie's regulars and a former Marine. They have a way of becoming public real quick. In the distance, I could hear sirens approaching. Rhett, I said, you have about 30 seconds before the police get here. I suggest you think carefully about what you want to tell them." He looked around the warehouse, at his hired muscle who were now backing toward the exit, at Maddie and her friends who were blocking his escape route. "This isn't over," he said finally. "Yeah, it is." I walked over to his Mercedes and noticed he'd left the keys in the ignition. "You know what? I think your car is illegally parked." I reached into the vehicle, put it in neutral, and gave it a push. The expensive sedan rolled slowly toward a large dumpster, picking up speed as it went. The impact wasn't dramatic, but it was satisfying. The rear bumper crumpled, the trunk lid popped open, and the alarm started wailing. "Oops," I said. "That'll buff out." Rhett stared at his damaged car in shock. "You can't do that. That's destruction of property." "Actually, it's an accident. These old warehouses have uneven floors. Cars roll sometimes." The police arrived just as Rhett's hired help were trying to sneak out the back door. After 20 minutes of questions and explanations, it became clear that no actual crimes had been committed. The two men admitted they'd been hired to have a conversation, but insisted they'd never intended any violence. Rhett was left standing next to his damaged Mercedes, his expensive suit wrinkled, his authority completely gone. "Need a ride?" I asked as we prepared to leave. He didn't answer. "Didn't think so," I said. "See you around town, Rhett." "Oh wait, no I won't, because you'll be leaving town, won't you?" As we drove away, I could see him in my rearview mirror, standing alone in the empty parking lot, staring at his ruined car. "Feel better?" Soren asked. "Getting there," I replied. The next morning brought a resignation letter from Rhett and a frantic phone call from Talia. She wanted to meet for lunch, to discuss our situation like adults. I agreed, but suggested we meet at Maddie's bar instead of the upscale restaurant she'd proposed. Talia arrived looking like she hadn't slept. Her usually perfect hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore minimal makeup. She looked younger, more vulnerable, but I reminded myself that vulnerability had always been one of her most effective weapons. "Dean, we need to talk about what happens next," she said, sliding into the booth across from me. "What happens next is simple," I replied. "You clean out your office and find another job." "It doesn't have to be like this. We can work something out." "Can we? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you've been working something out with Rhett for the past few months." She had the grace to look embarrassed. "That was a mistake. A stupid, impulsive mistake." "Which part? The affair or getting caught?" The bar was mostly empty at lunchtime, but I could see Maddie listening from behind the counter. In a town like ours, this conversation would be common knowledge by evening. "I know you're angry," Talia continued. "You have every right to be. But we've been married for 3 years. That has to count for something." "It did count for something, right up until you decided to help your boyfriend plan my termination." Her face went pale. "You heard that?" "I heard a lot of things, including your opinion of my intelligence and your confidence that I'd never figure out what was happening." She reached across the table and tried to take my hand. I pulled away. "Dean, I can explain everything. The expense reports, the meetings with Rhett, all of it. If you'll just give me a chance." "Explain what? That you've been stealing from the company? That you've been planning to destroy my career? That you've been lying to me for months?" "I never meant for it to go this far." "But it did go this far, and now you're facing the consequences." I pulled out a folder and set it on the table between us. "These are divorce papers. I'm filing for dissolution of marriage based on irreconcilable differences. The house will be sold and the proceeds split equally. Your car payments and credit card debts are your responsibility." She opened the folder with shaking hands. "Dean, please, we can fix this." "No, we can't. Because the problem isn't what you did. The problem is who you are. And who you are is someone who thinks other people exist for your convenience." "That's not true." "Isn't it? When Rhett humiliated me at the Christmas party, what did you do? Did you defend me? Did you tell him he was out of line? Or did you stand there and let it happen because you were embarrassed to be married to someone he considered beneath him?" She didn't answer. That's what I thought. I stood up to leave, but she grabbed my arm. What about my job? You can't just fire me without cause. Actually, I can. Misuse of corporate funds is definitely cause. So is falsifying expense reports and having an inappropriate relationship with a superior that created a conflict of interest. You're destroying my life. No, Talia, I'm just refusing to let you destroy mine anymore. I left her sitting in the booth, staring at the divorce papers. Outside, the December air was cold and sharp, but it felt cleaner than the atmosphere inside the bar. My phone buzzed with a text from Soren. Board meeting in an hour. They want to discuss the transition plan. The transition plan. From failed company under Rhett's leadership to whatever came next under mine. The thought was both exciting and terrifying. I drove to the office and found the parking lot busier than usual. Word had gotten out about the changes at Consolidated Industries, and employees were nervous about their jobs, their futures, their place in the new order. In the boardroom, the atmosphere was different from the previous day. Less hostile, more businesslike. Margaret Thornton had clearly done her homework overnight. Dean, we've reviewed your documentation and consulted with our legal team, she said. Your claim to majority ownership appears to be legitimate. The question now is whether you're prepared to actually run this company. I've been preparing for this opportunity my whole career, I replied. I know every system, every process, every weakness in our current operations. And what's your vision for moving forward? I activated the presentation screen and began outlining my plans. Streamlined operations, better client service, investments in new technology, a focus on sustainable growth rather than short-term profits. What about personnel changes? Asked another board member. Some will be necessary. We need people who are committed to excellence, not politics. People who understand that their job is to serve our clients, not their own egos. And your wife? Given the circumstances, her position seems untenable. Talia's employment will be terminated effective immediately. Her replacement will be chosen based on qualifications, not personal relationships. The meeting lasted 2 hours. By the end, I had unanimous approval from the board to assume the role of CEO, with Soren moving up to Chief Operating Officer. As the board members filed out, Margaret Thornton approached me. Dean, I owe you an apology. I've known about the problems with Rhett's leadership for months, but I didn't have the courage to act. Sometimes it takes an outsider to see what insiders refuse to acknowledge. I was never really an outsider, I said. I was just invisible. Well, you're not invisible anymore. That evening, I returned to my house to find Talia packing. She'd filled several suitcases with clothes and personal items, preparing to move out. Where will you go? I asked. My sister's place in Portland, at least until I figure out what's next. She paused in her packing and looked at me. Dean, I want you to know that I never meant to hurt you. I got caught up in the excitement, the attention. Rhett made me feel important. You were important, you just didn't realize it. I realize it now. Too late. She finished packing in silence. As she loaded her car, I watched from the kitchen window. 3 years of marriage ending with the sound of car doors closing and an engine starting. After she left, the house felt different. Quieter, but not empty. More like a space waiting to be filled with something better. My phone rang. Soren. How are you holding up? Better than expected, I said. What's the word from downtown? Rhett's house went on the market this afternoon. Looks like he's leaving town after all. And Dean, there's something else you should know. What? I've been getting calls all day from other companies. Word is getting out about what happened here. People are impressed with how you handled the situation. There might be some acquisition opportunities coming our way. I smiled and looked out at the snow-covered lawn, at the lights of our small town twinkling in the distance. Soren, I think we're just getting started. Think you can handle being the boss? I've been handling bosses my whole life. Being one can't be that much harder. After ending the call, I poured myself a whiskey and sat in my living room, thinking about the past 24 hours, about Rhett's humiliation at the Christmas party that had started everything, about Talia's betrayal and the end of our marriage, about the moment in the boardroom when I'd finally stopped being invisible. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, employees to manage, clients to serve, a company to rebuild. But tonight, for the first time in years, I felt like I was exactly where I belonged. The whiskey tasted better than it had in months. Outside, snow began to fall again, covering the town in a fresh layer of white. A clean slate, a new beginning. I raised my glass to the window, to the town that had underestimated me, to the future that was finally mine to shape. Let them talk, I said to the empty room. That's what this town does best. And for the first time in 3 years, I was looking forward to what they'd have to say.